Good morning, everyone. This is Tom Moore from VikeFans.com, and I'd like to welcome the man most of you know as Wobby. He is from the Vikings Entertainment Network, and he's responsible for content creation for the Minnesota Vikings. He's Mike Wobschall. Mike, thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the broadcast.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get started, VikeFans members have been asking me the last couple of days to get the lowdown on your daughter's first birthday party this weekend. And what we want to know is, how did that go? Did she wear her cake and ice cream, or did PA even let her get near it before he finished it off?
A little bit of both. You know, the baby, Isla, she was not quite sure how to respond to the huge chocolate cake that was placed in front of her, because a huge piece of chocolate cake is usually something that we will take away from her. So on her birthday, it's sitting there in front of her, and I don't really think she knew exactly how to respond to it, so PA helped, just basically shoved her into the deep end and got her going, and from there it was on, and she loved it, so I think she's a fan of chocolate cake.
Sounds good. And did PA have the chocolate ice cream and cake all over him, too?
Yeah, I mean, he's just a little messy and sloppy when it comes to eating and food, so he really can't help himself. And, you know, we had plastic on the floor, and we kept him away from all the expensive furniture, so it really didn't bother us.
Sounds good. Well, Mike, most people don't realize you have virtually no downtime in your job, as the NFL season has now become a year-long sport. So can you tell us about the stress you get to feel when you're forced this week to cover the proceedings for the Minnesota Viking cheerleader semifinals?
I thought we were going down a serious path there, and now I see we're not. It's not very stressful, I'll tell you that right now, and I'm not the only one who shows up to the final auditions. The Minnesota Vikings cheerleaders' final auditions are held at the Mall of America, which is in Bloomington, Minnesota, in what they call the Rotunda. And it's a 4-story, really 4.5-story rotunda, and fans who have either put this in their calendar to come and watch the final auditions, or who just happen to be in the mall shopping and then come to the rotunda and see this. Fans are lining up all 4 levels, and then on the main level, 7, 8, 9 deep, and then, of course, sitting in all the seats that we've set up for the 100 or so people that have reserved seats. So it's really kind of a cool event. In the middle of the off-season, it always precedes the draft, because the MVC squad likes to have its new team set for the draft party, so they can go to the draft party and interact with fans and enjoy some of the anticipation there. So, our director of the MVC is Tammy Krause. She's been doing it for a long time. She's very good at what she does. And, this is kind of a fun time of year, because we have free agency and the draft coming up for the football team, but the cheerleaders are trying to figure out who's going to be on their team for 2014 as well. And, so it's kind of a fun time for both sides of it. And the Mall of America final auditions is really kind of a fun night. That's going to be Tuesday, April 22nd. There'll be coverage of that on the website, and for those who can't make it to the mall, which is a large section of our fan base. So, that's kind of coming down to the wire right now. The semifinal pageant was last week, and the final auditions are next week. Well,
we're doing our part on VikeFans.com, as we've been on the website at Vikings.com doing some of the voting here, so we're trying to stay involved with you.
Well, the voting process is, and when it comes to political elections, it's not as fun as the voting process for, cheerleaders. It's much more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, as we turn to something more serious for you, you really seem extremely knowledgeable on the football side of things, rather than just being a traditional media guy. What we want to know is, what is your background in sports, and how did you get involved with the Vikings?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in south central Minnesota, 10,000 people. My graduating class in high school is 180. So not as small as it gets. It gets much smaller in Minnesota, but also not very large for Minnesota, middle of the road. And so I played 3 sports in high school. Not uncommon for there to be multi-sport athletes at that level of high school, and so that's what I did. And then I went to college thinking I was going to play baseball. I went to Gustavus Adolphus College, which is a Division III liberal arts private school in St. Peter, Minnesota, not very far from my hometown, not very far from Winter Park. And I went there thinking I would play baseball, but I also got a work-study job in our sports information department there, and what I discovered was I couldn't do both. I either had to stick with baseball and drop my work-study, or drop baseball and stick with my work-study, make a few bucks, and get some experience. I decided to go into the work-study program and work in the sports information office, and it turned out to be a good move for me. not only because it led me to my job here with the Vikings, and I gained a lot of positive and good experience working in an athletic office at the college level, but because I was a first baseman, and the guy who ended up playing first base for my 4 years at college turns out to be the Gustavus Adolphus all-time RBI and home run leader. So probably a good move for me to switch, because I was not going to be leading the college in home runs or RBIs given my history of hitting. So turned out to be a good move for me. I worked in the sports information office for 4 years at Gustavus and interned my final season, or my final year at Gustavus. I was an intern for the Vikings during the 2005 season. And then just kind of stuck from there. After I graduated, they asked me to come back for another year to be a full-time intern, which I accepted. And as my wife's family will tell you, I'm very hard to get rid of. And so I'm still here 9 seasons later as a full-time employee. So 2 years as a full-time intern for the Vikings, and then 2007 was my first season full-time. So, I saw the last year of Mike Tice's tenure. I saw the first year of the Wilfs taking ownership of the Vikings back in 2005. Went through the Brad Childress era, which, is looked down upon right now. But when you really think about it, 2 division titles and an appearance in the NFC title game, signing Brett Favre, drafting Adrian Peterson, drafting Percy Harvin, a lot of good positive experiences for me during the Childress area. And then who didn't like Leslie Frazier? I got to experience his era as head coach of the Vikings. And now we go into Mike Zimmer, Rick Spielman going from vice president of player personnel to general manager. So, I feel like I've gotten to see a lot of change within the Vikings organization in my time with the club, which is 9 seasons going on 10. And, we've seen 3-13, and we've seen 8-8, and 6-10, and 9-7. I've seen 12-4 in an NFC title game appearance. So, I've kind of run the gamut. I'm not saying I've seen everything, but I know I've seen a lot, and I'm looking forward to, what I'm going to see next.
As fans, and I'm sure you're right along with us, we're waiting for that roulette wheel to stop on the 16-0 season, so we haven't seen that yet.
Right. Well, and we all lived through the pain and the agony of the 15-1 NFC title game loss, but I think we would all say we will run the risk of experiencing that again if the alternative outcome is a Super Bowl win and a great season, because that's really what everyone cheers for. That's what everyone that I work with works for, and that's what all these players and coaches play and coach for. And those times when you're going 12-4 and you're winning the division for the second straight year, and you're in the playoffs, and you got a home playoff game, and you beat up on the Cowboys pretty well, and you go to New Orleans, and it's the NFC title game, and that is such a fun time, and it gets your blood moving, and that's why we do this, for those opportunities. They're few and far between. So when that window happens, when that window arises, you got to jump through it as fast and as quickly as you can. And I think right now the Vikings are at a point where they've come out of a window. And I think that window was 2008, 9, and 10, where you had the E.J. Hendersons and the Kevin Williams and the Jared Allens and the Antoine Winfields on defense, and you had Brett Favre and Steve Hutchinson and Matt Burke and that group of guys, Jim Kleinsasser on offense. We're coming out of that window, and now we're trying to start to build a new window here, a new team, so that hopefully as early as this upcoming season, but maybe a season or 2 or 3 from now when we get into the new stadium, we're in that spot again where a lot of the pieces are coming into place. You're 1 or 2 players away from making it happen. You go get that player or 2, and then you make a run for it, kind of like the Broncos are in the midst of doing right now, making a Super Bowl appearance last season, falling a little bit short. So what do? They go out and sign a guy like DeMarcus Ware. They think that guy's going to put them over the top. And, I'm really looking forward to the next time the Vikings are in that spot.
Absolutely, and you talk about a new start. It all begins with a new leader at the head coach position with Mike Zimmer. And while it's early on, Mike, can you tell us how Coach Zimmer runs things differently, and do you see his enthusiastic style starting to rub off on players?
I've seen glimpses of that enthusiastic style rub off on players, but it's really only been glimpses, and it's been short-lived because, as you know, the off-season program has started, but there really hasn't been any practices. Coaches can't be on the field with these guys, and, I don't step into the meeting rooms all the time either with them. So I haven't seen that hard knocks mentality from Mike Zimmer quite yet with the players, but I know that's coming, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing that. But I think what you notice so far with Coach Zimmer is you just look at how the Vikings have behaved in free agency, the players that they have signed. And I'm talking about, Tom, I'm talking about on defense. Captain Munnerlyn, an undersized corner but his reputation is he's gritty and he's tough and he knows how to make big plays. And he does his best work when he's playing in the slot. So you get an Antoine Winfield-type player who can come up and support the run, is a smart player, he's quicker than fast, and he does the dirty work. He's gritty and tough. Corey Wooten and Tom Johnson. Corey Wooten comes to us, defensive lineman from the Bears, Tom Johnson from the Saints. Blue collar, not in the limelight. They play second or third fiddle to higher profile teammates, but they get the job done. Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman signed those two guys. You re-sign Everson Griffin, a guy who's put blood, sweat, and tears into your organization the past 4 seasons, coming in as a 4th-round pick, much maligned because of some off-the-field concerns, but works out for you. You invest a lot of time and resources into him. He develops as a player, as a person. You re-sign him. Derek Cox, a cast-off from the Jaguars and the Chargers. Great physical ability, hasn't been able to put all of it together. That's a Mike Zimmer type of signing. So I think, the influence of Mike Zimmer so far has been primarily on defense, and it's been with guys who they may not be the All-Pros or the Pro Bowlers. You think of a guy like Linval Joseph, who we signed also in free agency, but they're nuts and bolts type of guys who are going to do their job and do it well, and they have a standard of performance that you can count on. And I think Mike Zimmer wants that type of player more than he wants to go out and get the 6-time All-Pro and rely on that guy to carry the day for a bunch of other guys who aren't going to play up to snuff. I think Mike Zimmer likes to balance it out a little bit, and I think that's what we've seen so far in how the Vikings have behaved in free agency. And I expect that to continue in the draft. When Mike Zimmer is working with Rick Spielman and they're looking at defensive players to add in the draft, I think they're going to look for those types of players as well.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned his defensive scheme and the signing of Linval Joseph, and it seems like that signal at least staying with the 4-3 defense. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that Mike Zimmer is going to run some type of hybrid style of defense in 2015?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we'll know a little bit more once the guys get out on the field to practice and we get a look at it. But, Tom, my sense is it'll remain a 4-3, a 40-man front, your standard 4-3 defense. Now, I don't know this for certain. It's just from watching the Bengals, from knowing Mike Zimmer defenses in the past, I think in the back end of this 4-3, I think you're going to see a little more man coverage than we've seen in the past. With Mike Tomlin and Leslie Frazier, there was a lot of zone defense. Cover 2, you play zone. Rush 4, drop 7, play zone. I'm not trying to spill the playbook because I haven't seen it. I don't know what's going to happen, but my sense is you're going to see a little more man coverage from the Vikings, and you might see linebackers be a little more active inside the box on passing downs. You might see them come after the passer a little bit more. I still think they're going to have to cover. I still think you want linebackers who can cover these tight ends. You want to have 2 linebackers that you can play 60 snaps in case you're in nickel most of the game. So that's not going to change, but I do think that the Xavier Rhodes, Captain Munnerlyn type of corner who like to get up on the line of scrimmage, play man coverage, be physical, not let receivers off the line, and stick with those receivers throughout their pattern rather than leave them off to another zone and then try and pick up another receiver who's running into your zone. I think we're going to see less of that and more man coverage. That is my guess. We'll know more once we get to training camp and preseason games and early next season. We'll know for sure what we're going to see, but my guess is we'll see a little more man coverage, but you're going to stick with that 4-3 front that's predicated on stopping the run on first and second down to force teams into third and medium or third and longs. And that's when your pass rushers come on the field. They pin their ears back. Your cornerbacks jump some routes, and you can make some big plays.
Yeah, and you mentioned the linebacker position, and we've still got some pretty big questions there. And when you look at this roster right now, and obviously it's going to change after the draft and the second wave of free agency, but of the group of Mike Mauti, Gerald Hodges, and Audi Cole, how do you see them fitting in, and which one would you expect to be able to potentially crack the starting lineup?
Yeah, of those 3, I think the best shot is Audi Cole, and primarily because he's got another year of experience over the other 2. And I think he looks good here so far in the off-season program. I've talked to him a couple times, run into him in the cafeteria or the hallways, and he looks another year matured. He looks bigger, stronger. I'm not going to put any numbers on him. I don't know what his playing weight's going to be. I don't know any of that. But to me, he looks good. He looks another year mature, and that's kind of what you want to see from guys, especially when you get into those late-round picks, where, there's less than a 50%, 40%, less than a 30% chance that they stick for even 1 year. Here you got Audi Cole, 7th-round pick, who's going into his 3rd year. So obviously the team thinks they have something there, and he played well in Aaron Henderson's stead last season. So to answer the question directly, Tom, I think it'd be Audie Cole for me, but Michael Maudie and Gerald Hodges, they're here for a reason too. And I think Gerald Hodges really showed some things on special teams last season, as did Michael Maudie, who was one of our best special teams tacklers in his rookie season. So, I think another year of maturity for those two. They kind of look like, to me, they're on a similar path to Audie Cole, where kind of under the radar, mostly special teams as rookies. Their second year, they make the team come out of training camp. They provide some depth at their position. Maybe they have some spot starting duty because of injuries or lack of performance by the player ahead of them. And then going into their third year, it's kind of the put up or shut up year, where you either emerge as a playmaker for us, or we're going to move on and find the next Audie Cole in the draft. That's kind of where I see Hodges and Maudie this year. And, I just kind of see Audie Cole being one step ahead of those guys. With that being said, Tom, we re-signed Jasper Brinkley, who was a Viking from 2009 to 2012, goes to the Arizona Cardinals in 2013. They release him. We've re-signed him. We picked up a linebacker from the Chargers waiver wire, Terrell Manning, I believe. He'll come in and compete for a spot. We have Larry Dean. We'll probably draft a linebacker or two. So, I think over the overall picture, you set Chad Greenway aside. He's going to be a starter. But the two other starters, I think it's good old competition, where for the off-season program, but primarily in training camp and the preseason, there's going to be a bunch of guys who do not have an ordained spot on the depth chart at all, much less a starting spot, and they're going to have to compete. And I think a guy like Mike Zimmer loves that. I think, he wants to go into a season where not every single starting spot is decided. I think he wants there to be competition at spots, and there are several places on the roster where that's going to happen, and I think there are two linebacker spots where that will happen, and it should be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, and as we look at spots that we think are nailed down, obviously the re-signing of Everson Griffin to start at defensive end probably puts him on the right side of the line. But is there any chance, you think, that they actually swap and put Brian Robinson over there?
Yeah, maybe. In the old Vikings defense that we've seen in the past 5 or 6 years, Jared was the primary right defensive end, and we didn't move him. And Everson was a backup in both spots, but Brian Robinson and Ray Edwards before him were the primary left defensive ends, and they didn't really move. You could slide B-Rob in and play defensive tackle and nickel, but from your base defense standpoint, it was pretty inflexible. Jared Allen right side, the other guy left side. Now, I don't know that will be the case with Mike Zimmer. It sounds to me like he's a little more open to the idea because his scheme allows for it to be a little bit more flexible, where guys can move around. So we've already seen Everson Griffin make plays on both sides. I did a film breakdown of Everson Griffin on the website a couple weeks ago, showing him making a play against run as a left defensive end and as a right defensive end. So we know he can do both things. So you can move him around. B-Rob is smart enough and athletic enough where I think you could move him around too if you wanted to. Tom Johnson, who we signed in free agency, he's played up and down the defensive line. Corey Wooten has played left defensive end and defensive tackle for the Bears. I personally thought he was better as an end for the Bears in 2012 than he was as a tackle in 2013, but you can move him a little bit. So, I think to answer the question, Tom, I think that the Vikings will be more capable of switching defensive ends left and right this season and going forward than they have been in the past.
Well, as we get towards the time that's running up to the draft, I was always curious, how often do you personally get to talk with Rick Spielman? And when you do, does he remain as tight-lipped about his draft plans to you as he would to the rest of the media?
Yeah, I ask different questions than a lot of the media does, so I'll get a different perspective from him or different pieces of information from him, but he's not one who wants to be splashy and start telling people what he thinks is going to happen. He's very good at studying and taking the work that his scouting staff does into account and really trying to figure out what's going to happen. Not only what the Vikings are going to do, but what teams in front of them are going to do or what teams behind us might want to do. So I can't really sit here, Tom, and tell you that he shares state secrets with me, but he's also extremely willing to chat with me, whether it's in the lunch line in the cafeteria or if I just walk into his office and have a question. He'll share information with me that isn't going to give anything away or hurt the team, but might help me come to an understanding about a player or a concept or how the draft works. So I'm not really trying to dodge the question. I guess he does not give me any more pertinent or, state secret type of information than he gives the media. But because of my access to him and because of our working relationship that we have, and we've both been here for a long time, he's willing to help me along on a project or something I'm studying or a piece of tape I'm watching or, a specific player or a scheme or a style of play that I might have a question about. He's always willing to help me out. And that really helps me in my work when I'm writing or when I'm doing a video piece. It really helps me explain something to the fans because I don't know everything either. I'm with the fans. I'm trying to explain what's happening to the best of my ability to the fans and be the fans' eye on the team. And Rick and his staff do a really good job of helping me out as much as they can with that. And the same thing has been the case with Brad Childress and his coaching staff, Leslie Frazier and his staff. The doors are always open. You can walk into there. And really, coaches at heart, Tom, are teachers. And we all have experiences in our life, hopefully, positive experience with a teacher where a teacher really took time out of their day to help us with something that we were struggling with or something we were curious about. And really, football coaches have that nature to them, too. You walk into Jeff Davidson's office and ask him the difference between zone blocking and man blocking. He's more than happy to sit there and show you. And so that's really one part of my job that I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're excited here on VikeFans.com because Rick Spielman's going to come on and talk to us after the draft. And we were thrilled to get that slot than the slot before the draft because I don't think we would have got a lot of information.
Good point. You're doing that the right way. That's strategic thinking. And, one thing that I really think is interesting, Tom, and maybe you can weave this into your questioning with him if you haven't thought of it already, is it's incredible to me, all the mock drafts that you and I might do for our websites or that we might see other people doing. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them aren't very good. I mean, Rick Spielman and his staff, they have a very good idea of what's going to happen in front of them. And when they're on the clock, the players that are going to be there and the decisions they're going to have to make. It's really fascinating to get him to explain that process and all the different scenarios they go through before the draft and, some of the discussions that they have and the relationships that they build with scouts across the league and some of the information and idea exchange that they have with some of their friends across the league. I think that's really a fascinating process. And, it really puts teams in good positions because they have a very good understanding of what's going to happen in front of them in the draft.
No doubt. Well, one of the guys who kind of remains a bit under the radar, and it's kind of surprising to say, is Blair Walsh after his big first-year season. I'm curious, have you had a chance to sit with him and talk to him about the concept of the NFL for a couple of preseason games? They're going to move that PAT back, where it's basically a 38-yard field goal. What are his thoughts, or if he hasn't talked to you about it, what are your thoughts about that?
No, it's interesting, Tom, that you asked that because I have talked to him about that, actually. When those meetings were going on, Blair, he got here early in advance of the off-season program, and I brought it up to him because I saw him in the locker room. And my point to him was, to me, what was fascinating about this whole discussion is, the role of kickers in the NFL. I mean, you have one side of this is saying, let's eliminate the extra point altogether. Let's either award teams 7 points for a touchdown or allow them to go for 2 if they want to do that. And from that standpoint, I mean, that really hurts the value of a kicker. You're taking a primary part of their job away from them. But the other side of this whole extra point adjustment thing is moving it back, making it a more difficult proposition. Right now it's like a 99% make. Moving it back to make it a 90% or 88% or less proposition. Now you inflated the value of kickers. So to me, that's what's fascinating about this whole discussion is it's not, let's leave the kickers as is or let's inflate their value a little bit or let's deflate them a little bit. It's like, let's get rid of them or let's make them extremely valuable. And I think it's really fascinating. And probably the way the NFL works, it's going to be somewhere in the middle, and that has worked for the NFL, and that's probably the best way to do it. So that's kind of what Blair and I talked about was, you make an extra point, say a 35-yard try. Now, to most people, a 35-yard try is still automatic, and it probably is. When you look back in NFL history at 35-yard or fewer field goals, it's probably super high percent. But let's say there's a minute and a half left, and you need that 35-yard field goal to tie the game. I mean, kickers are going to think about that. That's a pressure kick now. So I really like it. I like the idea of making the extra point a little more difficult. I do not like awarding 7 points for an extra point and eliminating the kick. I think that's a bad idea. And I don't like making it a 40 or 50-yard try, and where now you're getting down to 50 or 60%. I like making it a 30, 35-yard try, make it a little bit more difficult, and inflate the value of kickers who are good at that range and can handle that pressure on a more consistent basis. I think that's good for the game. I agree with Bill Belichick. Love him or hate him, he's kind of the one who spearheaded this, Tom. And his whole point is, the NFL is a league that thrives on competition, on there being an equal balance where every year, every game, any team can win it. So why do we have an important part of our game be such a non-competitive element, a 99% make? We can make the game healthier and better and more competitive by making the extra point a more difficult proposition. And I think Bill Belichick has hit the nail on the head with this, and I'm looking forward to the experiment the NFL will have in the preseason. And I know a guy like Blair Walsh, who's competitive and is confident in his abilities, he's going to take the challenge head on, and he's going to enjoy it too.
And there's a great different perspective on it. And as we, move from the defense to the special teams and now to the offensive side of the ball, I've heard you say many times in the offseason that you're expecting big things from Jarius Wright this year. What makes you anticipate his emergence in the offense?
Well, if you look back at Jarius Wright's production, he's not been given a consistent, steady dose of snaps to display a standard of performance that you can count on. But when he's been given opportunities to be out on the field, he's made some big plays. He had a big catch against the Green Bay Packers this past season. He scored a touchdown on Richard Sherman this past season. And, he's deceptively fast. I think because of his size, it's easy to think that he's quick, and he's got short area quickness and burst, and he's good in the slot, and he's good punt return. All that's true. That's very true about him. But I think he's got good long speed, too. And I'm not going to put a Steve Smith comparison on him because I don't know that he's got that dynamic ability to make a play on the ball and beat a bigger defensive back, high point the ball. I don't know that he's there yet, but I do think you can play him on the outside as well as in the slot. And, I had a conversation with Norv Turner right away when the Vikings hired him, and he recognized the same thing in Jarius. He said, you got a nice little player in Jarius right here. I like him. He wasn't telling me anything I didn't know. He wasn't saying, hey, just don't tell anyone this, but we're going to feature him in the offense. He's our number one guy. It wasn't anything like that, but, it was just Norv, who comes from outside of our environment. He's a fresh face who's going to not have any predisposed notions about Jarius Wright or any loyalties to him because he banged the table for him in the draft room or anything like that. He's coming in, Norv Turner, fresh, first look at Jarius Wright, and he's like, hey, you know what? You might have a player here. I kind of like this guy. And so that's really what opened my eyes to it. And, you go back and look at Jarius Wright's performances here with the Vikings, and he's had some pretty solid games. I just think he needs more reps. I think he needs more snaps. And he's coming into his third year, and, I think it's the time is there for him to get more reps and more snaps. And, I just think he's a guy who could take a big step forward.
Great. Well, Mike, I'm going to give you a thinker question here. And the NFL Network's Rich Eisen successfully ran a 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine in under 6 seconds, and you probably were there to see it. And he did it in a full suit and tie. My question to you is, do you think you could beat his 5.98 40 time in a suit? And maybe more importantly, which Viking player do you think you would have the best shot of besting in a 40-yard dash?
Oh, man. Well, I'm going to say, yes, I can beat Rich Eisen, because whether I can or I can't, I don't know, and maybe one day I'll find out, maybe I won't, but at least for now, I'm going to pump myself up and say I could beat him. So I'm going to say yes. Now, let's really think about this, the Vikings roster. I mean, I immediately go to offensive linemen on who I could beat. So fair or not, that's where I'm going. But I really don't feel confident in beating any of them. I mean, you think Phil Lodeholt, because he weighs so much and he's so tall, you think he's slow, but that's not. I mean, the guy is pretty quick. So I'm going to have to pick out one of our, I don't know if we have any guys who are injured. That'll probably be my best shot. I'm going to have to go in the training room and take a look and see if any of our guys are laid up and get back to you on that one.
I'll tell you what, we'll give a call out to Pat Williams, see if he'll come back, and maybe we'll give you a shot with him.
There you go. I like that. That's probably my best shot. I think I could take that. Now, in the 10-yard split, Pat's quick enough where he's probably going to have me beat. But in the 40-yard dash, I think I can edge him out.
So you'd be an endurance man?
Yeah, I think so. Now, Pat's quick like a cat now. I mean, when he was playing nose tackle for us, he'd get in the backfield quicker than anybody, but running 40 yards, that's a whole different animal for him.
No problem. We'll start reaching out to Rich Eisen and see if we can put this arrangement together for training camp for you.
I think it'd be entertaining.
Good. Well, as we close out our interview, I was curious from your perspective, and it came from a lot of our fans, of all the players that you've interviewed, you had to come across those ones who are notorious for pranks. Is there one particular guy who tends to like to prank you on the team?
Oh, man. Actually, Pat Williams was a good one. You know, I remember the first road trip I ever had with the Vikings. I was sitting in the back of the plane, and I had my phone out. And it wasn't necessarily a rough landing. I'm not going to throw the pilot under the proverbial bus, but you know, it jarred me a little bit, and my phone dropped on the floor. And of course, the pilot hits the brake, so my phone goes flying down the aisle. I have no idea where it's landed. I'm walking up, you know, checking to see if anyone's picked up a phone. It turns out it landed right in front of Pat Williams, who is now holding my phone. And I don't think I could have picked a Viking. I would have rather not had my phone more than Pat Williams. But it was Pat Williams. As it turned out, he couldn't have been nicer about it. He handed my phone over. Maybe he felt bad for me. You know, I might have been peeing down my leg or something. I don't really know, but he handed me my phone. So that was kind of something that he and I always had. But in terms of pranks, the most likely guy to get pranked, if you're going to get pranked, the most likely guy is Brian Robison. You know, he doesn't take anything seriously until the camera is on him. If the camera is not on him, he's always in the background doing things that will cause you to become distracted or even laugh. And whether it's you or the person you're interviewing, Brian Robison takes great joy in screwing it up.
Absolutely, and his family spends a lot of time on our website, and we've had Brian on before. We understand the prankster side of Brian Robison. Yeah,
he's good at it, you know, and he can't help but laugh, and I don't mind it. It's good to have that guy in the locker room. And, you know, I talked about Everson Griffin, Tom, on a serious note. You know, Brian Robison's another one of those guys, too, where you draft him in the 4th round and develop him, you invest time and resources into him, and he turns into a starter. I mean, how about the career Brian Robison has had as a Viking? Comes into the NFL, pigeonholed as just an explosive edge rusher, this Olympic track athlete that doesn't pan out in the NFL more than 10% of the time. And here's Brian Robison 6, 7, 8 years later, still on our team, a leader on our defense, and a guy that we're going to count on a bunch this year. So, you know, kudos to him. He's been a great guy to have around, and I'm glad he's still on our team.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, we appreciate you sharing your thoughts with the Minnesota Vikings with VikeFans.com. And I want to remind our listeners to catch all of Mike Wobschall's Minnesota Vikings thoughts by visiting Vikings.com every day during the season and the off-season, especially for his Monday morning mailbag where he answers the fans' questions. And you can get the most up-to-date Viking and NFL news by following Mike on Twitter @Wobby. Mike, thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to your continued great work covering all the Viking news.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate the work that you guys do, too, so keep it up, and hopefully we can connect again down the line.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right.